Welcome to Champered. I'm Chesa, and here we discuss all things 3D printing. In one of my previous videos, I said I don't have any good venting solution for my soldering fumes, and that I'll be addressing the issue in a future video. And today's video is that video. Initially, I wanted to have some sort of filtration system so that I can keep the conditioned air within the room, but that's too deep of a rabbit hole that I don't want to go down right now. So what I'll be doing instead is to vent the air out through the window. So I rigged this up, which is mostly off-the-shelf parts. That's a sheet of MDF, and I got some 4-inch ducting accessories that I got from different stores, and this is the only 3D printed part, but that was someone else's design. I did some minor remix work, but yeah, for the most part, I downloaded this and printed. On the right-hand side, I have a 4-inch inline duct fan that has the same magnetized connector as the hose, so they go together like this. Okay, taking a closer look at the inline duct fan, this middle piece is what I bought from Amazon, and there's a connector that I talked about. Here's a 4-inch to 2.5 reducer that I found in my garage, and this stand is something I printed. The stand is an original design, so it's probably worth a deeper look. It's a 2-part design, with the ring being the first part and the base being the second. And I want to say that what we're looking at is quite a bit different from my initial draft of the product. So now we're looking at it, it doesn't look like it needs to be a 2-part design, but initially I had something different. But yeah, so the idea is that the band or the ring is clamping this middle part of the duct fan, and this base is holding the ring up. And the purpose of these wavy legs is to dampen the vibration and rattling when the fan is on. See, the base has a little bit of flex and it's absorbing the vibration. I didn't film the beginning of the project because I thought this was going to be a very simple one, in that I could just buy some off-the-shelf parts and put them together, done. But it's turning out to be something more complex. So yeah, I'll bring you along. Okay, the fan has been installed. I just stuck it down to the shelf with some double-sided tape. And with that in place, a couple of things have become more apparent. First, the angle at which the fan is pointed. And obviously that's because the window is higher up than the shelf it's mounted to. I wanted to make that transition a little bit easier, so that explains the angle. And the second thing is why I switched from a 4-inch port to 2.5-inch. And that's because 4-inch would be a little more awkward. Yeah, let me change the view a little bit to better explain this. Okay, so this is my workspace, and just by looking at the size of the tools that are hung on the wall, it's not very big. And imagine a 4-inch pipe coming down to the work area. That would be a little too much. So that's why I made the decision to go with the 2.5-inch as opposed to a larger pipe. Okay, on that note, I'm a little torn as to how I bring the pipe down or the hose down. I could have a detachable hose with some magnets potentially, and then connect it each time I want to solder something up. Or I could build some sort of arm on the front face of the shelf and maybe bring it down. That might be a little more convenient. But I also have this lamp that's articulating. So I don't know, trying to picture 2 arms, one coming down this way and one coming from this way, seems a little too much again. So this may not work, but I'm gonna try and utilize the existing lampshade as a hood for the fume extraction. We'll see how that goes. Okay, now that we've decided on using this existing shade, I think there's a couple of ways to go about it. One is to literally drill a hole on the side and let the smoke get sucked in through the hood. But that's a little too destructive. I don't mind doing it. It's not necessarily an expensive lamp, so if I have to sacrifice the hood, that's no big deal. But I want to start with something that's less destructive. So what I've done is I took a picture of the profile and made this test piece. So just to make sure I'm following the contour, which looks like I'm doing. So yeah, this should be a good starting point. So my thinking is I'm going to make a bigger shade basically and then attach it to the outside of the existing shade. It won't be a full revolution. It will only be about the third of the way there. And the opening that I get from that little portion is the same as the surface area I get from a 2.5-inch hose. So I'm not losing any airflow there. Actually, come to think of it, it might actually be a good thing to lose some airflow because I don't want to lose too much hot air in the winter, which will increase my heating bill. So yeah, it might be a good thing to restrict some airflow. I guess I could start big in terms of the size of the opening. And if I want to reduce the airflow, I could just block off a portion of that opening to control it a little more. Okay, so for now, I'll make that outer shell and maybe a little ring that goes around this neck portion here to prevent the shade from falling down. Okay, the print is done and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. There's one area that's a little messed up, but that's not something that matters, so that's totally fine. So just to demonstrate how this is going to go together, so here's the shade. It's going to go on like this. And yeah, so this bottom portion is all open, which lets the air through. And yeah, there's not much more to it. If we look at the side profile, there's a little gap. I think part of it is because of that messed up area up here. So if I clean that up, I think this gap will close quite a bit. But even if we have a small gap, I don't think the shell is going to build up enough pressure for that little gap to be a problem really. So that's cool. But one more thing is that there's nothing holding the shade on this side. So it's possible that it could flap around like this. So I do have a little hole just in case I need to print a little clip or something. But I may not need it depending on how bad the problem is. Right, let's get to assembling it. Okay, I've gone ahead and installed the new unit, and I've made a few observations. Let's start with the gap here. So the gap I was showing before, it opened up even more, even though I cleaned up that little messed up area. And I think that's because the geometry of this part, where this lower part of the sheet meets the upper part, there's a little bump where the sheet metal was folded, and that's preventing this ring from sitting flush. So it's going up a little and is opening up this gap. As an attempt to address that issue, I printed a slimmed down version of the same ring. The outer dimensions are the same. The only thing that's different is the inner diameter is a little bit bigger. And it did close the gap a little bit more, but I'm not sure if that made a meaningful difference because when I put my hands next to the gap, I didn't feel much airflow with the old ring and the new ring. So yeah, it's hard to tell if that made any difference. Okay, moving on to my next observation. I was worried about this outer shade flapping around, but with the old ring, it is not an issue. But with the new ring, there's a lot more slack and it does move a lot. So if I end up using the new ring, I'm going to have to print a couple clips so the outer shade doesn't move. And the final observation I want to share is the performance of the whole thing. So my speed control ranges from 9 volts to 24. And at 9 volt, it doesn't do much. So for context, when I'm working on something, I don't bring the pipe right to the object I'm working on. I like to leave a little bit of gap so I can see the workpiece and the hose is not getting in the way. I'm going to test 4 different scenarios. One with 9 volts, next with 24, and then for the third one, I'm going to remove the hood and use the bare hose. And I'm going to do 9 volts again and finally 24. So for this experiment, I'm going to say the workpiece is going to be about 20 centimeters away from the hood and laterally, let's say about 5 to 10 centimeters. So I marked the location with that ring and I'm not gonna move it. Yeah, I'm not sure if that showed up well on camera because everything is white on my workbench, including the smoke I was trying to show. But to summarize, I think it might be serviceable at 24 volts if I put the hood on and bring it a little closer to the workpiece. But again, that'll block my view, it'll be more noisy, and so on. So at this point, I have 2 ideas. One would be to use a bigger 4-inch hose, which has its own downsides. And the second idea is to use that garbage hole that's integrated into the surface of my workbench as an exhaust as well. And this is actually something I thought about when I built my workbench a couple months ago. I even left some space just in case I end up implementing this. I've got a bunch of junk down here, but I can clean that up and I'll have a pretty good amount of clearance if I wanted to implement that. But at the same time, that's a whole lot more work than just using a bigger pipe. Okay, on that note, I realized it put the control right where the hose goes. It was already a problem with the 2.5-inch hose, but it'll be even worse with the 4-inch. So I'll try and move this over by a few centimeters, maybe right around here, so it's not in the way. I made a bunch of changes, including reprinting this piece to close the gap on the side. So as a result, the airflow is much better. But I still can't decide if I like this solution or not. I just can't get past this hideous look and the fact that this is blocking my view when I'm working on something. But I also don't want to admit that I wasted a bunch of time for basically nothing. So I'll try and use it for the next few weeks and decide if I want to keep it or not. I have plans to move my workbench to a different part of the house later this year, so maybe I'll revisit this issue again and come up with a different solution. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you got something out of the struggle I went through. See you next time. Bye.